Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Books and Books. We are live on the internet here from Coral Gables, Florida. On behalf of everyone here at Books and Books, we welcome you. I'll just take a moment to introduce you to our Books and Books newsletter. You want to pick up a copy of this tonight, of course, when you're buying your copy of Reclaiming Our Democracy. You can pick up a copy of this. This will give you a breakdown of all the great events we have at Books and Books every night of the week. Just like this one, we have Spanish events, we have kids events, we have poetry readings, first-time authors, celebrity signings, many events to suit everyone's taste. And as I say, they are now being live streamed through the internet. There are a couple of cameras here pointed at the audience for the Q&A portion of the event tonight. So we don't have a repeat of what happened last week. For those people who are sitting here in the audience and the camera's pointing, just make sure you're sitting next to who you're supposed to be sitting next to. I also remind you that flash photography interferes with the live stream, so if you could refrain from that, we'd greatly appreciate it. Again, I encourage you to go to our website, give us your email address. We can keep you updated to all the events that are going on here at the store so you don't miss a thing. And if you are watching online, you can always call the store while the event is in progress. We'll get you an autographed book, and we'll ship it to you free of charge for the shipping anywhere in the United States. And you can also call and ask a question of the author while the event is in progress. But tonight we're very happy to have with us Mr. Sam Daley Harris and Reclaiming Our Democracy. He's an author, and activist, and he understands why reading news headlines are enough to persuade anyone to throw up their hands in despair. But as he will tell you, hopelessness is not a strategy for making a difference on peace or social environmental justice issues. Daley Harris, a Miami native who is also in town to deliver the Distinguished Alumni Lecture at the University of Miami, will share insights and strategies from the 20th anniversary edition of Reclaiming Our Democracy. Heading the break between the people and government on ways to make a profound difference in the public sphere, his work described in the New York Times article, Lobbying for the Greater Good, centers around people's hopelessness about making a difference with government and what can be done to turn that around. Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus concludes his foreword to the 20th anniversary edition by saying, "The courage this book shows us how to unleash is our only hope to save creation for our grandchildren and theirs." Sam Daley Harris has been called one of the great certified social entrepreneurs of the last decades by Ashoka founder Bill Drayton. Daley Harris founded the Anti-Poverty Lobby Results in 1980, founded the Microcredit Summit campaign in 1995, and founded the Center for Citizen Empowerment and Transformation in 2012. Let's give him a big, nice welcome, Sam Daley Harris.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I just finished about 30-city lecture tour on the 20th anniversary edition of the book, and they were mostly on college campuses, and I haven't done one in a bookstore in a while, and so standing up here a moment ago, it reminded me of the first bookstore event I did on the original edition, and the ad for the talk was, it's a book about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, but there was a booming voice over the speaker saying, please join Sam. It was actually Sam Harris at that time. In his book about extraordinary people doing ordinary things, or encouraging people to come to that lecture. So I don't know why I had that flashback, but I did. So thank you so much for being here. It's a thrill to see everyone who's come. Thank you to Books and Books. And to Ellen Kempler-Rosen. Ellen actually contacted Mitch Kaplan during the Miami Book Festival, and I thought, boy, he's busy, and he immediately wrote back about having this event. So I'm thrilled that we were able to make this happen. I'm going to begin, as I usually do, with two quotes, and so the first one is from Mark Hatfield. Passed away a couple of years ago, was a Republican senator from Oregon who said, "We stand by as children starve by the millions because we lack the will to eliminate hunger. Yet we have found the will to develop missiles capable of flying over the polar cap and landing within a few hundred feet of their target. This is not innovation. It is a profound distortion of humanity's purpose on earth," end of quote. And I'm going to repeat it. Hatfield said, "We stand by as children starved by the millions because we lack the will to eliminate hunger. Yet we have found the will to develop missiles capable of flying over the polar cap and landing within a few hundred feet of their target. This is not innovation. It is a profound distortion of humanity's purpose on earth. End of quote. Don't you love that? And I say you're here because of your commitment to correcting that distortion of humanity's purpose on earth. I said this last night. I spoke at a church in Pasadena, California in October, a very activist church. And I said, I want to start with 2 Mark quotes. And I think they were thinking of Mark in the Bible. But anyway, my second one is Mark Twain, who is purported to have said, the 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. The 2 most important days of your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And for me, I think in a quiet moment, we would all agree that the why has something to do with giving back, contributing, making a difference, leaving the campsite cleaner than we found it. But that desire is smothered by layers of cynicism and hopelessness and discouragement. And when those can be released, that natural desire to make a difference can also be released. This talk and this book has basically 3 messages. The first is most people feel hopeless and cynical about making a difference with their voice as a citizen. I think that's quite obvious. The second one is not so obvious. I've seen over the last 35 years people make a profound difference with their voices as citizens, and we'll go over a little of that in a moment. And this is a tough one. This is the challenge, is finding an organization that really empowers you, that doesn't just keep you in kindergarten as an advocate, but can get you to 3rd, 5th, 9th, 12th grade and beyond. And so most of my talks, and I wasn't sure we would have room for it right here, but I want to see who's in the room. I ask organizations that do more than kindergarten, do more than the mouse click, this email, the petition online, that really take people much farther than that to come to my talks. And so if anything I say this evening encourages you to find out more or to do more, I urge you to go to some people who are engaged in those kinds of organizations. So I know Betsy is here from Results, and if you would stand up for just a moment, you could find her if you're interested in the work of Results on global and domestic poverty. And we have someone here, I think, from Citizens Climate Lobby. Is someone here? He's actually eating next door. He'll be a little late. But I really urge you to reach out to him when he comes. And I don't know if there's someone who was able to come from the Peace Alliance this evening. Well, there might be a little later. And the point is, I really urge you to find these kinds of organizations that offer so much more. I want to start with my story because I think it's very instructive. It's really my story from hopelessness to involvement. And it goes like this. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in music. I played percussion instruments in the Miami Philharmonic Orchestra for 12 years. I taught high school music at North Miami and North Miami Beach High School. And then I started a citizen lobby group on ending global poverty. And a lot of times that switch is a little confounding, and people want to know, well, what motivated that change? And when I look back in my life, there are several experiences that really come to mind. The first one is I graduated from high school, Southwest Miami Senior High School, in 1964. It'll be 51 years in June. And I played timpani in the orchestra at the ceremony. And just before the ceremony, a flute player came back to the percussion section and told me that a high school fraternity brother, a year younger, had died the day before, in a tractor-trailer accident in Georgia. It was her next-door neighbor, so she knew about it before I did. And I always say I was 17. And when I was 17, mortality was an irrelevant concept. But with the mourning period and the funeral, and after the funeral, I went with my friend's younger brother to collect his report card from the homeroom teacher. It really began to dawn on me that maybe I had 17 more minutes or months or years, and the questions of purpose started to come up. Why am I here? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? 4 years later, 1968, college graduation day, just before graduation, Robert Kennedy's assassinated. And it's another one of those, what is this life? What is this death? Why am I here? What am I here to do? No answers, but the questions are getting very clear. 9 years later, I'm a little slow. I'm invited to a presentation at the Carillon. This is all Miami stuff. I tell this all over the country, never in Miami much. At the Carillon Hotel on Ending World Hunger, put on by the Hunger Project. And this is really important. I go to this thing thinking that hunger is inevitable, unsolvable, because there are no solutions. Because if there were solutions, somebody would have done something by now. But I go to this thing, and early on I'm realizing there's no mystery to growing food. There's no mystery to basic health. You know, there's no mystery to literacy or the like. I'm not hopeless about the perceived lack of solutions. I'm hopeless about human nature, that people will just never get around to doing the things that can be done. But there's one human nature I have some control over, my own, and my question, why am I here? What am I here to do? And so so I get involved, and this gets to the end of the story. In 1978 and 1979, I speak to 7,000 high school students in Miami, where I lived, and Los Angeles, where I moved. And before going into the first classroom, I read some statements from the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, Food and Nutrition Study, and others, calling for the political will to end hunger. So I asked 7,000 high school students, what's the name of your member of Congress? I don't want to know if you wrote him. I don't want to know if you met him. Just the name. Who doesn't know this story? You've never heard this story before? Okay, great. Out of 7,000, how many do you think knew the name of their member of Congress? 5, a couple, okay. I'm surrounded by optimists all the time when I ask this question. Oh yeah, actually 200 knew, fewer than 3%, 6,800 didn't know, just over 97%, and results started out of this gap between the calls for the political will to end hunger on the one hand and the lack of basic information on who represented us in Washington on the other. And so I want to go next to 5 stories from my 30-city tour, so from the road. And one of them is I tell students it was about a year ago, on 15 college campuses, I tell them about this story about out of 7,200 knew, fewer than 3%. And then 35 years later, I ask the same question on these college campuses. What percent do you think knew 35 years later? Yeah, well, actually, the first was high school. Now, this is college. This is the LBJ School at the University of Texas, the Hubert Humphrey Institute at the University of Minnesota. This is Oberlin College. Actually, 10%, no, 90% cannot tell me what the name of their member of Congress. I'm going to skip one of the stories and go to this one. Last March, I spoke at Harvard, and before the talk, I had the honor of speaking to a professor of organizing, a brilliant guy who worked for Cesar Chavez for 10 years in the 70s. He was the genius behind Obama's organizing methodology. I get to talk to him. He'd never heard of Results or the Citizens Climate Lobby, a group I coached. And there was a lot of, why do you do it that way? And what do people say when you ask them to do that? And how does that work? At the end of 20 minutes, he looks at me and he says, yeah, but Congress is really dysfunctional. And this is a brilliant guy, really. I said, yeah, Congress is really dysfunctional. But last year, Congress appropriated $1.65 billion for the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. I said, Congress is really dysfunctional. And last year, it appropriated $700 million for maternal and child health programs around the world. I said, Congress is really dysfunctional. But if you roll up your sleeves, do your homework, and get in there, you can make some big things happen. Let me tell this last story. Last April, I spoke at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. And before the lecture, I spoke to students who were sitting around tables. They'd introduce themselves, ask a question. I'd go to the next table. I get to the last table, the last student, he says, I'm in an honors futures class. With a view of 50 years in the future, what's the most important issue we could work on? I said, well, my friends in climate change tell me if we don't deal with that, we're toast. And my friends in campaign finance reform tell me if we don't fix that, nothing's going to change. And my friends in global poverty tell me it's a blight on humanity. But for me, the most important issue is why so few of us see ourselves as change makers? If we could fix that, there would be this barrage of people coming into all of these issues and more. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk in a moment about a couple of victories, successes. And of course, the most important part is were kids' lives saved? Were kids in school? Were there changes made in the economies of families? Were there important improvements in other kinds of ways? But I want to focus on another aspect. I know that's the key, but I want to focus on how did the breakthroughs happen in empowerment? How did the breakthroughs happen in activism and engagement? So let me just start with this. In 1984, Results began lobbying on child survival issues. And by 86, we generated 90 editorials in 1 year in a successful campaign to triple the Child Survival Fund from 25 million to 75 million. It's now 700 million. And at the end of the campaign, we got a letter from the head of UNICEF. You'll see what he says in a moment. But we would send a cover letter and 4 editorials, a cover letter and 5 editorials supporting this increase from newspapers all around the country. And at the end of the campaign, the head of UNICEF takes our cover letter and in hand writes a note on the right-hand margin. He says, I want to convey my heartfelt thanks for the unflagging and satisfyingly successful efforts of Results on behalf of mothers and children everywhere. I thank you in my mind weekly, because every few weeks he would get this barrage of editorials. I thank you in my mind weekly, if not more often, for what you and your colleagues are accomplishing, but I thought I should do it at least once this year in writing. And so Results, as I said, lobbied year in and year out. This is a marathon, year in and year out for 30 years. And it went from $25 million in 1985 to $700 million today. And when we started in 84, UNICEF was reporting 41,000 deaths a day, preventable, from largely preventable malnutrition and disease. Things like measles coupled with malnutrition, things like diarrheal disease, dehydration and the like. And the latest report from UNICEF tells us that the death rate has plummeted from 41,000 a day in 84 to 17,000 a day today. And in September, the new goals will be released from the UN, and the goal will be 0. I'm not sure if it'll be by 2030 or if it'll be by 2035. Is 0 guaranteed? No, not at all. Is it achievable? Completely achievable. It just, how many people will wake up? How many people will educate themselves? How many people will meet with their members of Congress? How many people will meet with newspapers and editors to make the 41,000 to 17,000 go to 0? And that's UNICEF has this theme, believe in 0, and that's part of what they're talking about. Since 1990, the world has saved almost 100 million children's lives, including 24 million newborns. Results volunteers have been at the center of the advocacy. They didn't put needles in any arms, they didn't vaccinate any kids, but they've been at the center of the advocacy on these issues. Very critical. In 2013, the former deputy executive director of UNICEF, Kul Gautam, said, to a great extent it was because of the receptivity created by results that the United States funding for child survival increased so dramatically starting in the mid-'80s, and that led to many other countries coming on board. And in the same New York Times article, the president of the World Bank said, results is such a lean and efficient model that nobody knows about them. They're incredibly dedicated, very knowledgeable about the issues. It's remarkable how much they've done and how few have any idea about it. Now, I want to get to, well, how does it work? How do you do this? And so I'm going to skip this one so we can just move it along a little bit. What does it take to have breakthrough action like I've been describing? One of the things is focus. Most organizations, I'm thinking national organizations, they have this misguided assumption that to keep volunteers interested, we need to keep changing it up. So 2 months we'll work on X, and then 2 months we'll work on Y, and 2 months we'll work on Z, and then we'll change to A, and then to keep it interesting. No, you need to focus so people can drill down deep and develop confidence and competence and relationships. I'll say more about the methodology in a moment, but what I want to do is take a look at how this has been implemented more recently. I got a call in 2007 from a friend in Results. His name is Marshall Saunders. Marshall said to me, I saw Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, 3 times in 10 days. He said, then I went to Nashville to learn to present the slideshow, and I went home to San Diego and I led it 43 times. But early on, I realized I was giving people 98% the problem and 2% what they could do about it, and that they couldn't buy enough Priuses or change enough light bulbs to make up for what the government was or wasn't doing. He even said one day, he said, I was reading the San Diego Union Tribune and I saw an article that the Congress had appropriated $18 billion in fossil fuel subsidies, and I'd convinced 18 people to change their light bulb that day. He said, this is never going to work. So he asked me to coach him in starting Citizens Climate Lobby, and I did that for 7 years. And they now have over 225 chapters in the US and Canada. They didn't exist 7 years ago. And I want to just give you a little idea of this, again, this went far beyond the mouse click, this breakthrough empowerment of citizens in a sea of hopelessness and discouragement and cynicism, how some people are stepping up to the plate. So if you look at the bottom, last year in the US and Canada, Citizen Climate Lobby volunteers had 2,253 letters to the editor published. Do you know how many letters you have to have written to get 2,253 published? And in 2010, how many did they have published? Yeah, 36. So this is eye-popping grassroots empowerment. Let me do one more slide on this. Last year, their volunteers had 1,086 meetings last year with members of Congress, Canadian Parliament, or their staff. And how many did they have in 2010? Yeah, 105 in 2010. So this is really exciting breakthroughs. If you want greatness for volunteers, you have to provide a great structure of support. And I'm going to give you one piece of a structure of support, and it's a nationwide monthly conference call. Raise your hand if you've been on a webinar or a conference call by an organization nationwide. Okay. Most of those I would call results or Citizen Climate Lobby or Peace Alliance the exception, but most of them would break the following rules. So one component, this is how to do a conference call in a disempowering way and how to do it in an empowering way. So one aspect of this call, you might have 200 around the country or 1,200 on the phone together. One is a guest speaker. Now, most groups wouldn't even do that. They would have staff this month, and next month it would be staff. And the month after that, who they'd have is staff. And they wouldn't have a member of Congress, an outside guest, and that kind. And if they did, the still disempowering way is that the speaker would talk for the whole time, no Q&A, and everyone around the country would be a bump on a log. That's the disempowering way to do it. The empowering way is to insist that the speaker takes 10 minutes and then have 15 minutes for questions and comments and make it more interactive and energizing. Another aspect, which most groups would not do, would be to share grassroots victories. Like you hear from someone in Albuquerque or someone in Chicago about a victory, a success. Now, most would skip it, but if they don't, the next disempowering way is to only share the success and not the struggle. So someone might get on the phone with 500 listening in. They'll go, "We met with our member of Congress yesterday. It was a blast. We can't wait to do it again." But they leave out that it took 11 phone calls to get the appointment, that they had to meet with the district director first, and that their knees were knocking when they went in. If you leave that out, then everyone around the country, they're thinking, wow, we've made 2 phone calls and we haven't, maybe we should give up on this. No, if you include it, they're saying, oh, we've made 2 calls. I guess we have 9 more to go. We better get on it. So you got to start with the struggle. Everyone is with you because they get the struggle. And when they're with you with the struggle, they're with you to see the victory and maybe to see it for themselves or their group also. Last one. This is another one that everyone would leave out, and that's practice in being more articulate. A role play to a member of Congress aide or a editor or some most would leave it out. If they include it, the still disempowering way is you do a role play and it's awful. I mean, it's really stinky. And all they can say after you're done is, thank you so much for volunteering. You were so courageous. Everyone knows it was terrible. You gotta have, to make it empowering, you have to have some legitimate coaching on how it can be improved. So let's look, these are the last few sections. What does empowerment and transformation look like at the individual level? And so I'm going to read this. It's from the book, actually, but I think I'll read it from the book. Let me tell you about this woman. It's a woman named Ellie Sparks. And Ellie Sparks lived at this time in Richmond, Virginia. She now lives 2 hours from Richmond. Her member of Congress at this time was Eric Cantor, the House Majority Leader at the time. Her newspaper was the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Ellie said, when I joined Citizens Climate Lobby, I was suffering from climate trauma. I would read Bill McKibben's book, Earth, and I would weep at home, and I would weep at work. She said, then I joined Citizens Climate Lobby, and 18 months later, I was co-leading a workshop on creating relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. The month after the workshop, she's on their national conference call describing the workshop. So I'm going to read it from the book, and this is her description. She said, our director, Mark Reynolds, likes to say, we're betting the farm on relationships. Then he tells us we need to build relationships with members of Congress and editorial writers. Most CCL volunteers have never done that before. What in the world does a relationship with a member of Congress look like? How do we connect with an editorial page editor? Some of us have found models for those relationships in other parts of our lives. Gary in Boston uses the model of a work relationship. My relationship model is different. I adore romantic relationships, so I use romance as my model. That first meeting with the editorial writer, it's like a blind date. Only you've decided ahead of time you're going to marry this fellow. You're going to be sweet and interesting, not too intense. If it doesn't work with the editor, you're going to marry one of his friends at the newspaper, the business editor, environment writer, city editor. Someone at this paper will find you interesting and compelling. It's just a matter of being persistent until you find the right connection. I see the relationship with a member of Congress as an arranged marriage. If you live in their district, their member's aide has to meet with you. That's what our congressman's legislative director told us in January. Since then, we've met with the ledge director 9 times. We schedule 45-minute meetings with him. He keeps us for well over an hour. He doesn't want us to leave. Why? Because a good arranged marriage starts out cold and heats up over time. That's different than a love match, which starts out hot and slowly cools down. I see the editorial page editor as a painter. His canvas is the editorial pages. His palette is filled with letters to the editor, op-eds and editorials. I'm his muse, model, and assistant. Who do you know that talks like this? Considers themselves the editorial writer's muse, model, and assistant. I want him to fill his canvas with colors that I like, so I'll have my group send 3 to 5 letters to the editor whenever the opportunity arises. The more colors I put on his palette, the better chance of having him pick 1 or 2 of my favorite colors. This is the end. This is the last paragraph. This is the genius. This is citizen empowerment and transformation of a woman who started at climate trauma. She said, during our conference, this was a couple of years ago, I met with 20 congressional offices. I met with many folks whose view of the world was very different than mine. Going into their offices was hard. I had to let go of a lot of emotional baggage. I can no longer judge them or hold hostility in my heart toward them. I had to let go of my fear of climate change and my fear that they wouldn't listen to me. I had to center myself in love. Releasing fear and centering in love, this is sacred and profound work. End of quote. Now don't forget, where did she start? Climate trauma. Where did she end up? Sacred and profound work. I think if I asked a normal person to go meet with 20 congressional offices over 3 days, I think they'd call it hard work or dirty work. I think we need to get to the sacred and profound, which in fact it is. Let me close with these last 2. There's a page in the book where there's this drawing, and one side is a smaller circle that's labeled your comfort zone. And to the right is a much larger circle that's labeled where the magic happens. The trick is finding an organization that helps you move out of your comfort zone and over to where the magic happens. And that's what you need to do, is find an organization that provides one of these deeper structures of support. Is there someone who's come in from Citizens Climate Lobby? Would you stand up? Okay, so afterward, if you're interested in learning more, find him. Results, Betsy, for a moment. Ellen is here. Yeah, stand up for a moment.
If you
Go.
would like to send a message to your congressman that will be hand-delivered about climate change, see me.
Okay, great. And then see these women on results. And yes? Perfect. Stand up, please. If you're here and you would be interested in learning more about the Peace Alliance, and I just want to say one thing about the Peace Alliance quickly, and we'll go to Q&A in a moment. Their primary legislation is the Youth Promise Act, which is legislation that would fund violence prevention programs in communities throughout the United States. It's really genius stuff that's begging for people to learn about it, stand up, and speak to their members of Congress about it, et cetera, et cetera. So results, Citizen Climate Lobby, Peace Alliance. Maybe you all, when we finish, can come up here and they can find you a little more easily. And also when we finish, I'll be signing books there, but you'll have to buy them at the counter and then bring them here. So last quote. This is from George Bernard Shaw's Man and Superman. I'm going to repeat it, and then we'll go to questions. This is the true joy in life. The being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die. The harder I work, the more I live. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. Once more, this is the true joy in life. The being used for a purpose, recognized by yourself as a mighty one. The being a force of nature instead of a selfish, feverish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and it is my privilege to do for it whatever I can. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch which I've got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. End of quote. I'm so grateful that you've come. I'm anxious to hear your questions, your comments, your complaints, anything you've got. Would you, you could raise your hand and you could stand up and make your comment or whatever. Please go ahead, introduce yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. So I'm one of the group leaders for Results in Miami, and we work on global issues, health, maternal child health, ending poverty and hunger. But I wanted Sam to explain to us, please, what the acronym means.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm glad you asked that question. RESULTS, responsibility for ending starvation using legislation, trim tabbing, and support. And I want to describe this word trim tab. This usage was coined by futurist and inventor Buckminster Fuller, who would have said, you know, if you had a huge ocean liner, at the back of the ocean liner is a huge rudder that's difficult to turn, but at the end of the rudder is a smaller trim tab, and if you turn that, the rudder will turn more easily, and then the ship. And he said, with regard to the ship of state, don't ever try and turn the ship. Don't even try and turn the rudder. Find the trim tab and turn that. Then the rest will turn with greater ease. And so what would the trim tabs be? It would be your members of Congress. It would be your newspaper. It would be the media. It would be community groups, etc. So we work hard to find and turn those trim tabs to make the ship of state turn more easily. Who else has a question right there? Go ahead. Introduce yourself.
Hi, Sam. I'm Michael Malone. I spoke to you on the phone earlier this week.
Yes.
So I work here in Miami with the Children's Trust. So we do a certain amount of advocacy work in the community. And so I wanted to see if you would talk a little bit. You mentioned the word focus, but I'm sort of interested about maybe what I'll call the art of facilitation with working with groups, because on one sense you're focused on what you might be doing, but then a group will have its own. It can become very chaotic and sort of unwieldy. So it's this openness to what the issues are, what people are interested in. But as you mentioned, the idea of focus. So to me, it's this.
Let me make this distinction. I was working with this one group, I still am, and they developed this brilliant conference call. But I said, but nobody said they would be on it yet. So what I want to say to you is there's this whole piece about going on the road and gathering 20 people, whatever number of people in the room, and having this workshop, this presentation, where the folks in the room become crystal clear about what you're inviting them to do, and that what the purpose of the group is, what the purpose of their checking this box or that box is, and they're aligned on what the mission is. And so the distinction I want to make is this whole distinction about going on the road and starting these kinds of groups, whatever they are. I mean, when I started the first 50 groups of results, I was a substitute teacher in the LA school system, and I would take a 3-week leave from substitute teaching, and Eastern Airlines, you remember Eastern, and Delta Airlines used to offer 21 flights for $649 if you did them in 21 days. And I did 5 21-city trips every 4 months at starting these groups. But we'd go into the room, so if there were 20 and 8 raised their hand, those 8 were on board. And you didn't have this problem of, but these want to do that and those want to do this, because people were aligned and clear about the mission and the purpose and the methodology. Go ahead.
A little follow-up. Just maybe I'll listen to what you said really clearly. So the trust is spearheading a literacy sort of initiative in mind called Read to Learn. So together with the school system, the library, and a whole entity of organizations trying to collaborate. So but we go into community meetings with the idea we're talking about literacy focus, but then there's all these other issues that are related to that. So that people that are legitimate
stop.
issues.
What do you want? You go to the community. Let's say this is your community meeting.
Right.
What are you asking of the community? Let's say there are 30 in the room or whatever.
Well, it is an engagement to become engaged about the issue of literacy and what we can
and
specifically do. Well, it speaks specifically to parenting and parenting engagement and that sort of thing, but it has a lot of other tentacles that legitimately relate to it.
But precisely, let's say if there are 30 in the room and 10 are ready to put their track shoes on and do what you ask, what are we going to put our track shoes on and do? Are we going to train little teams that will go house by house, or are we going to,
Well, I think I'm speaking the point, like at least, and I'm speaking from the trust perspective, is to be open to what the community might tell us. So then that we're not going in and sort of imposing what our ideas are.
Perfect. Okay. So you're listening.
Listening, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
So, but I'm just speaking to that balance of listening and guiding.
Yeah.
So if I think what you're sort of
saying. Okay. Yeah. So I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the listening is an important piece. We can talk after. Who else? This is your chance to stump the speaker. Come on. Yes.
Yes.
Introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm
Stand
Sarah.
up so they can hear you better.
Hi, I'm Sarah Rushnick, and I was wondering, what do you think about, now you're thinking about lobbying, and I always have the impression, the Do Nothing Congress, and I always have this defeatist, all that negativity of that defeatist atmosphere, and then when I'm thinking about these outside groups, something like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where we're saying, let's go ahead and have clear goals and do things and get it, and stay away from almost this Congress and this Congress lobbying. And I always feel like these lobbying, if I look at who are my competitors in the lobbying groups that have the money and have the influence.
Right.
I'd like you to comment
So
on that.
I want to pick up on the first thing you said. What about this defeatist attitude and this do nothing Congress? And so I'm going to read a little excerpt and tell a story. A little over a year ago, I spoke in Minnesota at the College of St. St. John's University. And before the lecture, there was a book group, students, faculty, and staff. And there were about 20 people. And in the book group was a nun, a sister who had just retired at 37 years librarian on campus. And she came to the book group and she said, I love this discussion. I love the book group. But I have a problem. I can't get moving. My congresswoman is Michelle Bachmann. And this was a great session, but I need your help. So I asked her to turn to page 117 in the hymnal. No, I asked her to turn to page 117, and I asked her to read I asked her to read a prayer. And it was a prayer that a volunteer in Houston had written to his member of Congress that he had trouble with. But the group in Atlanta rewrote the prayer by putting their congressman's name in. He had voted against famine aid for Ethiopia, and they were like, now what do we do? So I asked her to take this prayer, read it out loud, but put Michelle Bachmann in. And I'm going to read it right now as she did. Thank you, God, for Michelle Bachmann. We know she's a good woman who wants to do right in the world. We know she struggles with the same problems we do, closing our hearts to those who don't agree with us. There are no thoughts or feelings that she has had that we haven't had, and vice versa. We pray for all of us to learn compassion for people in our country and far away, for rich and poor. We pray that Michelle and we will be less frightened of each other. We pray our focus will be more to love and appreciate her and less to change her. Help us to remember that sharing love with the world is the highest contribution we can make and will lead to children being fed and the planet surviving. Forgive our righteousness and anger. Open our hearts and minds to find the next expression of love for Michelle that she can receive. And I said to she read it and she lightened up a little bit. And I said to him, the group used to read this every month. And after they read it in Atlanta, they'd go, yeah, right. And then they'd read it again and they'd go, yeah, right. And then eventually it sunk in. And for 2 years, they would go to sessions with their congressman. His name was Pat Swindoll. He called it Chat with Pat sessions. They renamed it Spat with Pat because so many people came and they were arguing with the congressman. They said, but we'd come with a smile and a handshake and some information about how you could really make a difference. And 2 years later, they brought in a video of the Grameen Bank, and he sat on the desk with his knees up to his chin, watched the video, and they asked him if he'd be a co-sponsor of this bill, and he said, I'd be delighted to. In fact, I have a column in the local paper. Do you think you could help me write something so we could educate the public? And they started with they wanted to wear bags over their heads. They were so embarrassed with the congressman they had. So it's, we can, someone said to me on an interview recently, said, don't you feel hopeless? And I always said, I tried hopeless. I started hopeless. I mean, it's not like a new shoe. I've worn that shoe and it's just not useful. And then people ask me, well, what gives you encouragement? 2,253 letters to the editor published in 1 year. That'll encourage me a lot. 1,086 meetings with members of Congress or their staff in 1 year. I get encouragement from that. Because the thing is, what the world's going to feed you is they'll feed you Ebola, ISIS, the murders in Paris, France. You'll get a steady diet of that. You better find yourself an organization that'll nurture you out of that morass and into something higher than that. Who else? Yes. Introduce yourself.
My
Yeah.
name is Judith Parker. I used
want to
to live in
stand
the community. I'm visiting. I don't have anything to say except that I wish that people from these other organizations would stand up and tell us what their organization does.
No problem. Where are you from? Well, you're
Kansas
visiting.
City.
Where?
Kansas City.
Okay. There are groups, some of these groups there. I know Peace Alliance there, Citizen Climate Lobbies there. I don't know about results. Betsy, you want to take a moment and face them and speak up?
Well, I might have my other colleagues that are here stand up and put their 2 cents in.
Well, let's
what
just
they-
do one person for a
Okay.
minute, and you'll have
Okay.
lots of time after. Yeah. Go.
Results is a citizen advocacy organization. We get together once a month, as Sam described. We have powerful meetings together, powerful speakers, powerful information to allow us to go to our member of Congress or to call up the editorial board and educate them. Your member of Congress and their staff have no idea about everything in the world. It is impossible to know everything. If you get the courage and learn, and really learn deep, as Sam has said, you can go into your member of Congress or your commissioner or your mayor, whatever it is that you want to talk about. They put their pants on just like you do every morning. They are also paid by you. You can go and educate them and tell them this is what matters to you. Not only to me, but I have 100 people in my community that this matters to.
Great.
This is what Results does. We empower people. We try to get them to take on some very important issues. And in Miami, I would say in Miami we work on international issues, healthcare, maternal child health, poverty, and things. But Results also has chapters on domestic issues. So they work on issues like this, foster care issues, Head Start issues, CHIP, and the like. So that's what we do.
Great. Thanks. We have 9 more minutes,
I want
so.
to add something about how effective Betsy is. Her congresswoman, our congresswoman, Ileana Rose Layton, called her up personally and invited her to come to the receiving of the Congressional Gold Medal from Muhammad Yunus. We had been lobbying for this for 3 years. Was it 3? Was it more? It could have been. But you know, every year we would until we she was the for bills like this. There's one Republican and one Democrat from the House, one from the Senate. The leadership. Anyway, this was a day I'll never forget because this is results work, where Muhammad Yunus, who is the head of the Grameen Bank, who happens to be on the board of Results also, millions of people, especially women, are borrowing their way out of poverty because of his brilliant design. And in the rotunda of the Capitol was Nancy Pelosi, Harry Reid, Mitch McConnell, and John Boehner, all agreeing that this man was a genius and that what he did makes a huge dent in ending poverty. All agreeing that very day, and Betsy had a personal invitation from Ileana, who was the Republican up there who had signed the bill from the House. And that was the work of Results, it really was. And this very small group in Miami that got her to be the co-sponsor for that bill. So I can't begin to tell you how many times we had the door slammed in our face about issues that we've lobbied for. And what a big win that was. But
Okay, thanks. We only have about 8 minutes, so I'm going to do the talk for the two of you, and you can come up and talk to them as much as you like. The Peace Alliance does similar work, but their work is in the area of peace and violence prevention. They have monthly conference calls with guest speakers. Last month was brilliant. Last Saturday it was. Results' call next month is Nicholas Kristof, the New York Times columnist. And they go around the country. I know they started a group recently in Kansas City, and people drove 2.5 hours from Manhattan, Kansas, to start a group there or something. And so it's really powerful work, and you should go back and talk to her. And Citizen Climate Lobby, we went over earlier. It's the same kind of thing. They have monthly conference call with over 1,000 people on their call every month, and guest speakers, and all of these kinds of activities. And they're groups that get you out of kindergarten. And that's what you need to find, groups like that that'll get you out of kindergarten and way beyond. Does anyone else have a question that they'd like to please introduce yourself?
Cliff Colbert. This is a little off the trajectory,
Yep.
but related for me, and that is we get involved to some degree, not at the level that you are, but my frustration comes in knowing that the funding is going to where we expect it to, and not to some unrelated area, whether it's corruption or just going to other places.
Yeah.
How do we get the comfort
Well,
that the
yeah.
funding is going where we
Very
expect
good. Well,
it
there are
to?
everyone heard that, I think. With one aspect of funding is I write a personal check to Group X and want to know that that's going well. The thing that we do is lobbying Congress for policy change or funding increase or whatever that is, and that's another aspect of the question you ask. So, among other things, there are oversight reports that are done, there are studies that are constantly done, there certainly is leakage one way or another from time to time, no question about it, but there's this constant focus on what is the goal. The goal is, when we started lobbying, 150 million children around the world were not in elementary school. They were elementary school age and they were not in school. Now it's 58 million right now. I mean, another one that you want to get to zero, and of course you want it to be good education. When we started lobbying, it was 41,000 deaths a day, now it's 17,000. You might say, well, there was corruption and it could have been 15,000. Well, that may be the case, but we're always on the case, trying to make sure that the funds are doing what they're intended to do and progress is being made and that kind of thing. So you could go online and get some other information about the kind of oversight reports and the kind of investigations that go on to make sure that that's so. We have time to maybe one more. Let's see if there's one or two. I can take them both and try and answer them both. Anyone want to ask something else? If not, I will end with a reading thing. Let me do that. So this is actually an excerpt about the first editorial I ever generated in a newspaper. It was in the LA Times. It was a very long time ago. I only had black hair at that time. And I was organizing, as a substitute teacher, a candidate forum on world hunger. We had already done one for Senate candidates, and now it was House candidates. And I was being interviewed. I met someone who knew this writer for the LA Times, and we were talking, and I said, at the time, TV station news did editorials. And I said, a number of the TV station editorial writers said, we won't do an editorial because hunger is not a state or a local issue. And she was shocked to hear that, and then she was a little nervous, and she said, did you call my paper? Did you call the LA Times? I said, we did. We called the editorial page editor, and he wouldn't call us back. So she said, oh, don't call him. Call Kay Mills. She's the only woman on the editorial board. And so this is me on a break at a junior high school in a phone booth. Do you remember phone booths? Making a call to the newspaper. My first call to Kay Mills was from a phone booth in the main office at a junior high in East Los Angeles. I walked in, closed the door behind me, put my diary and grade book on a built-in ledge. We don't usually do editorials on days, World Food Day or Labor Day, Kay said after a brief conversation. Let's pick an issue and do one. I promised to mail materials on key anti-hunger legislation Bread for the World had been pushing. We had no staff, we had no ledge staff, so we had everyone join Bread for the World because they had a ledge staff. The fourth period bell rang, I said goodbye and hurried back to my classroom. That telephone call and the editorial that followed altered my sense of myself and what was possible. It was normal for me to distribute 100 photocopies of an action sheet or article, but when that first editorial appeared, I remembered thinking, not only has the LA Times written this editorial, but they've made 1 million copies of it, and they've delivered it for us too. How marvelous. My early morning dash to the front yard, you remember the dash to the front yard to get the paper? My early morning dash to the front yard to pick up the LA Times was my run to democracy. I realized that I had the right job to make a difference. Substitute teacher. I realized that I had the right training to make a difference. Music. I realized I had the right bank account to make a difference. Nearly zero. I realized that making a difference wasn't a function of any of these. It was a function of commitment and persistence. End of quote. So we all have our realizations, and we all, I think, will want to find an organization that, if it's right for you, if it's not, it's not. It's not time yet. That will help you out of your comfort zone with the empowerment and the inspiration and the camaraderie over to where the magic happens. I thank you so very much. Betsy, if you would stand there for a moment, and if you would come to the middle for a moment from the Peace Alliance, and if you would come over here from Citizens Climate Lobby, they'll be better able to find you. And you might come up to them because you just want to learn a little bit more. And you can go to their website also. Or you might come up because you want to dive in. That's up to you. So please come up and talk to them. I'll be over there signing books, and we'll be. You can pick them up at the register. And thank you to Books and Books, and thank you to everyone here who's come. Thanks so much.
Sam, as he said, the books are for sale behind the counter. If you're watching online, you still have time to give us a call. We'll get one signed and ship it to you. Sam will be signing right over here. Thank you so much. Stick around. We got a lot coming up in the store the rest of the night. Thank you.
Thanks.
Citizens Climate.
Thank you.